Rex Heuermann didn't just commit these horrific crimes against multiple women, he engineered them. And prosecutors say he built a blueprint, step by step, for how to select, control, and dispose of these victims. And now that blueprint may be the very thing forcing a guilty plea, because once a jury sees it, the case changes completely. There are cases where the evidence tells a story, and then there are cases where the defendant writes the story himself. And this may be one of those cases. Reports are emerging that Rex Heuermann could plead guilty in the devastating Gilgo Beach serial crimes. Now, as a former prosecutor, I'm not surprised because there's a mountain of incriminating evidence from cell phone records, internet searches, planning documents, and DNA evidence that may even incriminate his own family members. Welcome to the Margaret McLea Show. I'm your courtroom translator, and let me translate what's happening here, because if this plea deal is real, it's not happening in a vacuum. It's happening because prosecutors have him by the throat. Let's go behind the scenes. I mean, why would anybody plead guilty to horrific crimes that would land them in jail for the rest of their lives? And for what he did to the victims, he's going to have a real tough time in prison. Why not make prosecutors prove their case against him beyond a reasonable doubt? I mean, this guy stands accused of brutally taking the lives of 7 women and disposing of them. Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, Amber Lynn Costello, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Sandra Castilla, Jessica Taylor, and Valerie Mack. Briefly, here's the background. The investigation took place on Long Island, New York, spanning from 1993 to 2011. Many of the victims' remains were found along Ocean Parkway, a road near the beach town of Gilgo in southern Suffolk County, New York. Prosecutors recently disclosed that Heuermann conducted over 100 searches related to the investigation and thousands more for severe and disturbing violence against women. You can only imagine. Let's discuss the planning document. According to prosecutors, this was a manual written in capital letters designed to methodically blueprint the selection, killing, and disposal of his victims. This guy was an architect, so it's really eerie that he had a blueprint of all of this. This is premeditation at its most calculated level. The document is broken into 3 sections: pre-prep, prep, body prep. That's crazy, body prep. It sounds so clinical, detached. Under the pre-prep section, prosecutors say Heuermann reminded himself to check such things as weather conditions, to look for surveillance cameras, to control variables. And that's not just planning, that's risk management. Then it escalates. The prep section includes instructions to create a holding area, to stage equipment. And prosecutors say this points to preparation for the depraved crimes against his victims. And again, you can only imagine that. And now we are no longer talking about opportunity, we are talking about actual infrastructure. Then comes body prep. Instructions on how to avoid leaving evidence, how to handle remains, how to reduce the risk of identification. According to District Attorney Ray Tierney, the methods outlined in this document correspond in what he calls excruciating detail to how these victims were actually found. And that's critical. Translation: in a courtroom, it's not just about what a defendant wrote, it's about whether that writing matches the crime scene. And here, prosecutors are saying it does. Now, let's take a step back and look at the legal landscape. Before this document, the case was already strong: DNA evidence, cell phone records, internet searches, all tying Heuermann to the victims. But this is different. This is what I would call a roadmap for conviction. You can cross-examine a witness, you can challenge DNA collection. As a defense attorney, you can argue contamination, bias, mistakes. But how do you cross-examine a document that the defendant allegedly created himself? Crazy. Now, the defense is doing what it must. They're questioning authorship. They're suggesting it may be taken out of context, and they're pointing out inconsistencies between the earlier theories about the Gilgo 4 and the newer charges involving dismemberment. That's strategy, because when the evidence becomes overwhelming, the defense has to create distance between the defendant and the narrative. But here's what becomes even more significant. Prosecutors say that this document dates back to around the year 2000 and was modified over time, which raises a larger question. How long was this pattern in motion? Because one of the victims, Sandra Castilla, was killed in 1993, a case that had never been connected to Gilgo Beach before, and now it is. And that suggests something every prosecutor and every jury understands immediately, right? This case may not be a series of isolated acts. This is a calculated system. And then there's this detail. The manual allegedly included a reminder to destroy computer files, which tells you something else: consciousness of guilt and awareness, not just of the crimes, but of how to avoid being caught. And yet, forensic investigators were able to recover it anyway. So much for that. So now let's go back to the headline: a potential guilty plea. If that happens, understand what it means. This is not a case where prosecutors are struggling to prove intent. This is not a case built on circumstantial fragments alone. This is a case where the prosecution can walk into court and say, he didn't just commit these crimes, he designed them. And that is often the moment when cases resolve, not because the defense wants to concede, but because the risk of trial just becomes too high. We don't yet know the terms of any potential plea. We don't know which charges would be included or whether families would support it. But from a courtroom strategy perspective, if this document comes in at trial, it may be one of the most devastating pieces of evidence we've seen in a serial murder case in decades. This is why I always say, to understand a case, you have to understand how the system sees it. Because sometimes the most powerful evidence isn't what investigators find, it's what the defendant leaves behind. And in this case, prosecutors are saying he left behind a blueprint for murder. Once again, thank you for watching The Margaret McLea Show, and stay tuned because I will be following all the latest developments in this case.